Hi there, welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. Today's video I am going to be installing this little guy right here. Don't know if the camera will focus on that, looks like it. This is a composite audio and video output modification board for the Intellivision. Now this is a mod I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I haven't because I've read quite a few negative things about it, I suppose. I guess there really isn't an all-in-one solution to correctly audio-video modify a Intellivision with good picture quality. But this one seems to have lots of decent feedback and reviews. I got the kit off of eBay, and I actually have a personal acquaintance I know of from the OVGE shows in the past who's also installed this mod and said it looked really good. So we'll give it a shot. In fact, this mod will be getting installed on my Sears Video Arcade. For those that might not know, this is actually the Sears and Roebuck version of the Intellivision. And this one's seen some better days. It is very worn, that's for sure. You can see that where it says Super Video Arcade here is pretty worn off. Yeah, it's definitely had some use and abuse, but you know what? It still works really, really well. But because it is kind of my ugly duckling of Intellivision consoles, it's also the one I'm least concerned about the cosmetics, as far as if I drill something out of place for the video output ports, things like that. And that's another thing I need to kind of decide on, is where I want to install the AV jacks. The most common location that people recommend is right along here, along the side. I've never been a fan of cables coming off the side of my console, so I think I'm going to try to figure out a way to instead reroute them through the back end of the board along here. Although, in looking at this in hindsight, with the curvature that exists here, I don't know that I'll be able to get the ports to sit in there well and still give me enough clearance for the AV cables. I think I might be able to make that work. We'll just have to look inside. We'll have to crack it open, take a look inside, and see where the best placement will be for that. So this is the first time I've actually done this particular modification anyway. So we'll give it a shot, and hopefully it'll work for me. Back in a bit. Okay, so what are some of the tools that we're going to need for this mod? Well, I always like to keep a pair of side cutters on hand. This is a pair of Crescents. I've also got a pair of Exolites that I haven't used yet. These are always handy for getting into tight spots to cut extra wire or to trim extra pieces of the leads off of the components, things like that. In this particular case, I'll probably be using these to trim off additional wire links inside of the console when I apply the modifications. I always like to also have a nice little tiny pair of needle nose pliers, very handy for holding on to tiny things. And then, of course, like a lot of other consoles back in the day, I'll need a number 2 trusty Phillips screwdriver to get into this thing. Other things I like to have on hand, just in case, is a fairly decent set of little wire strippers here, in case I need to add extra wire. And aside from that is plenty of solder, my soldering station, and sometimes, in this case, I will be using this. I also have my desoldering iron as well, which I'll be using to remove some of the RF shielding inside, just to make it easier. You'll also notice I've got a tiny little, this is my tablet with a keyboard attached. I use this for pulling up documents. You know, I don't remember everything. I am not as young as I used to be, so I will frequently use this as a handy little tool to have off to the side to look up, scroll through, research, pull up schematics, things like that. Alright, so let's get started. First thing I'm going to have to do is get these controllers out of here. They will be getting in the way. And on the Sears version of the Intellivision, the controllers are actually removable. They are not removable on the other models. It's one of the unique things I actually like about the Sears version of the Intellivision console. Removable controllers. Alright. There we are with that. Next, we have 6 screws on the bottom that we'll have to remove. And they appear to be hidden here, 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 and here. So that's the next step. Okay, that's done. Now I'll turn the console over. Carefully take the lid off. Won't need this for a while. Set this off to the side. And now I have some more additional screws I have to remove. Located here, 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 and here. Okay, the cool thing about this is that since this will come off as one piece, it will also become my tray for holding the screws for this. Have to carefully move this off to the side. Disconnect this power cord here. And what I am doing right now is I'm getting the controller wires out of the way. The controller cables actually attach with connectors to the main board. I'll zoom in on that in a little bit so it'll be easier to see. There. Controllers are disconnected and the controller tray. I'll set that off to the side. Over here, actually. Okay, that just leaves us with essentially the main board itself, and it is attached not only with this, what looks like a central ground wire or a voltage wire here, but also with a ribbon cable here, which I will have to carefully disconnect. And it is just plugged in to the power supply board. And you'll see that you have to be careful. Number one, these ribbon cables are really old. I mean, we're talking about 30-plus-year-old stuff here. So you gotta be careful not to bend those pins. All right. Now, the cool thing is I just gotta flip it over, and all of the connections that I will be making for this modification board will actually connect mostly in this area here. Okay, and looking ahead of time at things, I noticed a few things. For starters, I had forgotten that I had actually worked on this Intellivision many years ago, and you may have noticed when I took it out of the main console case shell that if you've ever looked inside of one of these before, there's usually another RF shield that covers this entire top. Similar to like what you see back here, there's usually an all black one that covers up here. Mine is obviously not present, and I must have not have reinstalled it or chucked it whenever I worked on this once before, which isn't a very good practice, but you know, I guess it is what it is. Okay, so let's talk about the board a little bit. Here is my plan after looking at this and kind of planning this out a bit. Just so you can see, this is where everything is going to end up going. So for starters, I have to attach, like most of these video mod boards require. I don't know if that'll show up very well in the camera, I'm kind of far away, but we'll see. There is a 5-volt input source that it will require. I obviously have to feed a video input line into it. I have to feed in, there's also a video out. This mod board here that I purchased actually has everything labeled, so all I have to do is just follow which wire color goes to what and then attach it to the main board where it needs to go. So, almost every modification board, especially a small circuit board like this, usually requires voltage. It's almost always 5 volts, which is usually available in many places on the Intellivision. In this particular case, the easiest place to tap 5 volts from, according to the instructions that I've looked at, is right here off of this connector pin. And I'll pick this up and show it in a little better detail. Wait for that to focus in a little bit. There we go. Right here is where they say to tap 5 volts from. And then from right here is where we can get our ground, which is pretty obvious because you'll see this big chunk of trace on the board here that's attached to. Well, that's a giant ground plane that goes throughout the board. But in looking at this And I'm going to use my multimeter to test this. I'm not real wild about applying a lot of amount of heat or trying to solder to this ribbon cable area. So in looking at this, it looks like I can trace. It looks like that should also provide me with a 5-volt connection. And that is an unused pad on the PCB. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to use my meter to make sure that these are tied together. And if they are, then that's where I'm getting my 5 volts from. So what about the audio and the video? Well, they actually connect off the points related to the RF modulator. Now, most of the kits I've seen actually attach the wires directly off the wires by soldering off the RF modulator. I will do something similar for the audio wire, which goes right here, I believe. I will probably just attach it right down here by the pad. But for the video wire, since it's way over here, instead of soldering to this, I'm just going to trace. Look, I've got an unused hole right here, an unused via that would be much easier to apply some solder to the top of and solder the wire to that. So that's where I'm going to get my video from. I'll feed my audio from here. And then my other plan is to take the board itself and probably use some of my strong Velcro, double-sided tape Velcro to attach it to the top of the of this large IC here. I think that could be, I'm not sure which one that is. Maybe the exec? There's two different chips. They call them the Grom and the exec. I'm not real sure which one's which. But that would be probably a good spot that I could just Velcro this to. It's low profile. The wires don't have to go very far, and I should still have plenty of room to reroute the audio video wires output back to this side, because once this is all put back in, it essentially goes in upside down like this. So I'm going to need my audio video wires to come out over here when it's all said and done to connect to the connectors themselves. So that will all be fairly short run distances, which is good. I usually prefer to have the wires shorter than long, less risk for interference. So yeah, I'll double check these connections, and that's what we'll do. Okay, so this is pretty interesting. So I was wrong about my initial thoughts on the connection points here. So what I'm going to end up doing, and I did find some other spots. So the ground is actually the second to the last pin here, as is evidenced by the fact that I've got ground continuity just about anywhere I touch for that. The 5 volts is actually this first pin right here. So the pad that I was originally looking at isn't going to work. However, I did find, by luck, over here, and again, I'm not sure if that can be seen very easily. Let me see if I can zoom my camera in on that. Okay, so I've got this zoomed in on the areas where we're going to need to focus on my wires to be connected for the power and ground. So ground attaches to this point right here. But again, I'm not real wild personally about soldering directly to these pins with this ribbon cable. So I'm just going to attach my ground wire to another ground source, which is anywhere along the side of this board. Got plenty of ground planes to that, or plenty of places to attach ground, not a problem. Alternatively, I don't even have to use this ground that's on here if I didn't want to. In fact, in many cases, when I make a board or a PCB for myself, I will usually, instead of having a separate ground that goes to the board and another ground that goes back out to the connectors, I'll just attach the ground off the connectors directly to a ground point on the board itself or on the main PCB. But this one is all circuited out nice and pretty, so I'll go ahead and set it up that way. But again, I'll attach my ground to any of these points. Power is a different story. I originally thought it was this pin here, which then gives me a nice clean pad here, but that's not where power is. Power is actually this pin, and it doesn't attach here, but what I did find is an unused pad on the board for a capacitor or for a resistor right here, marked C6, and that is a direct continuity contact or connection from the 5-volt source. So I should be able to attach my 5 volts right off of this unused pad. There's no resistance, very little, so that should be good. And that'll keep it away from other things. I'm not going to have to risk melting this ribbon cable at all, which is what I would prefer. And it'd be a little easier to manage up my wiring that way. Okay, so for the audio and the video, I talked about it before. The video will actually need to attach off of this pin here. And I didn't really investigate to look. There might be other spots on the board where I could attach wires to, but these are nice and large enough that I wouldn't have a problem soldering directly onto this. And then the audio attaches right off of here. And actually, I take that back. I did find a spot for the video right here to right there. Again, there's an unused via right here that I can run my video wire to, and then the audio wire will just come off of here. So, that's the plan. Now I will get to soldering. That's on there. And then these last two are probably, yeah, they're my audio out and ground out. So that's really the only wires I need to worry about attaching to the board itself, is just those 3 points. Not bad. So now I just need to Velcro this down. So I'll be right back. Okay, I've got me some Velcro here. So, not real scientific, I just peel it off. All those 3M adhesive that they use on this Velcro is pretty strong stuff. There we go, come on. There. And the easiest way to do this is I will attach it to the bottom of the board, like so. And I might be wondering, why am I using Velcro? Well, honestly, it just holds really well. I've tried using double-sided foam tape in the past, and after a while it will wear out. And honestly, the orientation that this thing is going to be in, it's going to be upside down, so gravity will always be fighting against it. So I just figure I'll have better luck using this Velcro, to be honest. So that's my plan, and I'm sticking to it. So I'll just set it there and attach it. And I don't think that's going to be coming off too easily. Now, the cool thing is even if the Velcro were to somehow escape or come loose or what have you, this entire thing is already shrink wrapped, so it shouldn't short out against anything inside the board if that should ever become an issue. I don't anticipate it to be. All right, so that's my video out. This is my ground, this is my audio out. Okay. I just wanted to know which wires were which, so I wouldn't confuse them. And I'll probably twist these up a little bit, try to keep them together. Alternatively, I could also use a big chunk of shrink tube, would also work. And I might do that anyway, just because these wires are so thin. If I had a complaint about this particular mod kit that I've bought on eBay, it's that these are really, really thin wires, especially in the case of a power wire like this. I know it's only 5 volts, but I tend to want to use a little thicker gauge wire. It's just how I am. Additionally, usually I will have thicker gauge wire always for my power and for my ground. But this came with wire, so it prevents me from having to use my own, so I'm okay with that. Okay, so there we are. Black ground, yellow is composite video, and my white is my audio. Now this particular kit also only came with 2 actual RCA connectors, so it only came with connectors for one audio output. But that's okay. I mean, the Intellivision doesn't really do stereo anyway, so that's not a problem, not any kind of a deal breaker. Although that extra piece of wire jacket there is. And then I got my video. So the good thing is they are different colored RCA jacks, so I won't be confusing them, which is good. I've got kits before where they give me like 2 black ones, and I have to figure out another way to label them on the back of the console so I know which is which. Yeah, that never makes me too happy. Now on this ground wire here, since there's just the one ground wire, but I need to have a shared ground between both the composite audio and video, what I'll probably do is strip off a whole big chunk of this, if I can, just like that. Twist it up nice and tight, and what I'll end up doing is I'll end up threading this single large strip, or this large section of stripped wire, through the ground tabs of both the audio and composite. So that's what we'll do on that. Okay, so got those. Now at this point in time, what I would usually do is tin the wires up a little bit, and I will probably still do that. Still not wild about how much wire I have here, but if I have that big of a problem with it, once I've got this in place, I can always double it up like this, zip tie it together or something, which I've done before. You know, something like that. Or even just use a larger piece of shrink tube to slip over all of that to reduce the length of the wire a little bit, just to tidy it up. I mean, the length of the wire is still present, but it does tidy it up. And if I ever have to do any repairs in the future, I've got extra wire to strip back from without having to splice on extra. That never looks too professional when you have to do that. So what I need to do now is tin up these wires a little bit. So that's what I will do now. Use my other spool of solder here. Okay. It's not really wicking it up like I would like, but that's okay. I will make it work. I always do. This is like aluminum wire. That's the main problem. I don't usually use aluminum wire either. I use the copper stuff. But this will be alright. Okay. So there we are. Board's in place, wires are where they need to be. Should be looking pretty good. I'll show you some more close-ups up here of the solder, where everything is at. Okay, so I have the audio. The audio wire is soldered down to here from the audio input source off the RF modulator, and then the video I actually have soldered to this unused via right here instead of all the way back over to here. It's all together, so should be good. And then for my power and ground, I actually ended up soldering my 5 volts off of this unused portion of the board for a additional resistor or a capacitor or something that they were going to put here, a small axial capacitor it looks like. And but I found out that that ties directly into the 5 volts, so it makes a nice clean spot to add that in. And then my ground wire I actually have rounded back around here and underneath the RF, or by the RF modulator, and I've attached it here. Again, also to an unused via on the board. Hopefully that's clear enough. Okay, so the next step, that's really the more or less the hard part, is getting all the components in place, and in this case the wires soldered on. Now I'm ready to drill my holes and get my RCA jacks installed into the case. Okay, so what I've done now is I've got some cool blue painter's tape that I use that sticks really well to consoles but not permanently, and just kind of measured. Actually, I'll be honest, I just kind of eyeballed these. Usually if I'm more strict on my space, I'll measure it better. But I just made sure to give myself about 3/4 of an inch between the marks for the different connectors. You can almost go as much as a 1/2 inch and still be okay for your clearance, but I prefer to give myself a little more room, and I've got plenty of space inside the case for this. The other thing to keep in mind when you're doing the drilling and installing RCA jacks is to make sure that they're straight. Nothing looks kind of more gross and ugly than to have the 2 connectors, you know, one higher than the other. I'll be honest, I've done lots of modifications at this point on other consoles, Sega Genesis, things of that sort, my Master System, and I still can't always get these straight. And I got a couple of different things that I use to try to do that. I've got this nice little straight edge which doesn't have any measurements on it, but because it's clear, it allows me to easily kind of eyeball, in this case, where the height is based on the bottom edge of the console itself. So I can kind of gauge and know that they should be roughly at about the same height. And so again, it's not scientific. There's other ways to do it using actual small T-squares, things like that. But it'll be okay. Again, what I will use to actually drill the hole will be this 1/4 inch Forstner bit. These RCA jacks have a 1/4 inch sized hole, and these Forstner bits are really nice because what they do is number one, it's got a really sharp point. Not sure if it'll focus on that. We'll try. There we go. It's got a really sharp point on it, which makes it good to line up and make sure that the starting point is straight where it needs to be. And then the way the bits themselves are designed, they're designed for plastic and for wood. And basically they slowly carve into the plastic without biting into it too hard and possibly cracking it, which is an issue on a lot of these older consoles, especially something like this Intellivision, which is, 30 plus years old. The Atari 7800 cases are notorious for being super brittle, and they're not even as old, but just cheaper plastic. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and get my drill, get this going, and get the holes put in. Okay, I've got my drill ready to go with my Forstner bit, and we're ready to put some holes in this thing. So again, I can use the sharp point of the Forstner bit to line up where I need to start, about like that. Okay, so using a Forstner bit is easier on the plastic, but it does take a lot longer to actually drill through the holes because it is a more careful drilling process, as I'm sure you noticed. And also it seems to produce a little more debris than a normal standard drill bit would. But again, it's softer and easier on the plastic, less likely to break it. And there we are. So let me take my tape off here. Kind of wipe this off a little bit, and we'll see how the holes came out. There they are. They might be a tad bit off, but they're really close. And if I want to test this, all I have to do is get my connectors out. There. So when they're installed, they'll look basically like that. Plenty of room between them for the connectors I need. Okay. So I will go ahead and screw these down and secure them to the outer shell, and we'll be ready to finalize it and get it all buttoned up. Okay, so now I have the new audio video jacks installed right there. We'll see if my camera will focus in on that. There it goes. And you might notice that the center ground tabs here, I've got them draped up over each other, and if I turn this around, I'll see if I can get it to catch and focus in again. You'll see that the center holes on those are lined up so that I'll be able to thread the single ground wire through it, and because they'll share the same ground between the video and the audio connection. So the other thing I did is I used my Dremel's tapered grinder bit a little bit and widened the holes to try and countersink the audio video connectors into the plastic a little bit more. And that's for two reasons. One is to give it more of a professional finished look. Additionally, it gives me more thread posts. It'll stick out a little bit further on the back end, which makes it a little bit easier for me to work and solder the additional wires back here as well. So yeah, so that's what's left to do now, is to solder on the remaining wires and finish up the project. So let me get this set up here. Here again is the main board with the audio video, or with the AV mod circuit board in place and wired up and soldered. I don't like how long these wires are, but I will say that while I'm very tempted to cut them to make them a little shorter, it's also not too bad an idea to give myself a little more length, or to leave them as they are so that there's room once the board's in place to kind of move it around, take it out, work on it, whatever might be needed. So what I think I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to line this up a little bit just to kind of give myself an idea of just how much extra wire there is. And there is a bunch. So here's what I'm going to do. Again, I want to give myself enough wire that if I had to, I could take the board out and potentially flip it over like this to be able to work on it and service it and be able to desolder if need be. So what I think I'll do is I'll cut a little bit off the top of these wires, right about here. And I know that I already had cut them and trimmed them up and pre-tinned them, but that's okay. It's not that big a deal. And although it won't really be necessary, I think I will go ahead and put some heat shrink tubing around this to keep the bundle together better. So let's get some of that out, ready to go. Let's see here. There we are. And now now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my little butane torch that I keep around just for the purpose of what I'm about to do here. You could just use a standard lighter, but then it takes a little more flame and this torch lasts a little longer and is a little cheaper to operate in the grand scheme of things. But I do still use a standard lighter to light the torch. So torch is lit, you can see the blue. Bring this shroud over it, this heat shroud, and now the torch turns into a heat gun. And then I just have to lightly go over the heat shrink. All right, that will work. Yeah. So now all I need to do is to turn the board back over and solder these finishing wires where they need to go. So let's get them in place. Okay. Move the board out of the way. There's the wires there. I'll bring this up a little closer to the camera, make it easier to see. So I've got them initially threaded through and ready to hit them with some solder to secure them in place. All right. And let's see, where did my tiny spool of solder go? There it is. I do have a big roll of solder here, but I prefer to use these little leftovers that I've got from previous spools first. So first thing I'll do, since I can already see it here, is we'll take care of this grounding tab since I'm just right here. So just get my iron behind it. So there we go, all three are in place, and then I've got a little extra bit of wire slack here. So what I will do with that, okay, what I'll do with this is I'll just use this little tiny cable tie I use. I use these a lot for chassis monitors when I replace capacitors on those as well. They're perfect for tying down electrical wires, and they're good for putting into tiny little holes on PCBs to secure things down. And in this particular case, I'm going to use them to keep these wires in check. I could have also used some small heat shrink tubing, but these wires are so thin, I don't know that I've got any tubing that's that small to really work. So we'll just put that there for now. There we go. So connectors are in. I am ready to finish putting this back together. Okay, and we're back. I've got everything connected back up here now. My audio video's in place, power's in place. All we have to do now is plug in a game and give it a test. Make sure my TV display is on. Good to go. And power it on, see what we get. I'd say I have composite audio and video. Looks really good on my monitor too. Cool. Well, hopefully this video was informative, and let me know in the comments what kind of mistakes you think I made or what kind of improvements I should make in future videos, besides the obvious of lighting and probably a better microphone. But yeah, I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks for watching.